Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, everyone. It's Susan Coffin here at Attitude's ADHD Experts. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Marianne Russo, the founder and host of the Coffee Clutch. As the parent of a child with special needs, it's just so easy to feel as if you're the only person facing this loneliness and these difficult decisions. So Marianne's topic today is hope, empowerment. And for all parents of special needs kids, whether it be ADHD, learning disabilities, anxiety, depression, autism spectrum, or any other challenge, Marianne hosts the Coffee Clutch, a website and a radio program that provides support and information and the expertise of wonderful cutting-edge researchers, psychiatrists, special education experts to parents. Please log on to thecoffeeclutch.com. It's T-H-E, coffee, C-O-F-F-E-E, clutch, K-L-A-T-C-H.com, and see her wonderful resources. She's also the founder of the Bright Not Broken Institute of America, along with Diane Kennedy and Rebecca Banks. It's a brand new institute designed to raise awareness and help professionals and parents with the special issues of twice exceptional children, those who are both very bright and have a special need. So if you're a parent of a 2E child, this is the right place for you. Marianne, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very grateful to have your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. As you were introducing me, I'm honored to be listed today as an expert, parenting expert. But in fact, I really don't see myself that way. I see myself more as a parent's advocate. I end each show by saying you are your child's best advocate, but really who are the advocates for us? The parents. And without us, these children can't succeed. So, the parent's advocate is a tag that was given to me a long time ago when I first started the Coffee Clutch, and, I embrace it. I like it.
It's a good label. We feel that way at Attitude as well. We're not experts. We're advocates for parents. We bring resources, and I think we have a lot in common in that way. So with that, let me turn it over to Marianne, and thank you again.
The first thing I want to talk about is accepting your child's diagnosis. Acceptance really takes time. Accepting a diagnosis is one thing. Accepting the life it brings is something completely different, and it's really much more important. So when I speak of acceptance, I'm speaking of accepting the full magnitude of the situation, the acceptance that there are some things you will be able to do to make changes and improvements and have triumphs and gains, and there will be other things that, for no lack of effort, are still going to remain. So acceptance really is accepting the fact that your purpose in life has changed. Accepting life as you knew it has changed. Your day-to-day routine has changed. Your marriage has changed. Your parenting style, if you have other children, needs to change. The life your other children will lead will change. And really, very importantly, is your comfort zone is going to change. So really, your world changes. And accepting the diagnosis when you sit down with the doctor and you're told that they have XYZ, that's really the easy part. It's accepting the life unexpected. That truly takes time and work. And, there are parents that have been raising their special needs children for a very long time, and they're stellar. They're doing all the right things, and they're giving their child the best possible care and treatments, but that doesn't mean that they've really accepted. And that's where I see a lot of parents really struggling, especially if parents don't agree on the approach. So, some tips that I have is that you need to accept that you have a lot of work ahead of you. You need to accept that your child is different. And by the way, what child isn't different? You need to accept that your child's gains and acquired skills may come at different stages and at different levels. And you need to set really attainable goals so that you don't hurt their self-esteem and self-confidence. You need to accept that despite every effort, every intention, every therapy and treatment, progress is going to take time. It's not an overnight. There are no quick fixes to these things. We need to accept that progress may not come, and the fork in the road may be in front of you, and you're going to have to learn how to navigate. As I say, a bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you miss the curve. So staying on course and taking it easy on the turns is pretty important. Knowing the difference between what you can change and what you cannot, that is acceptance. Knowing that labels are for designer clothing and will not define your child, not allowing it to define your child, that is acceptance. Knowing that change, although hard at times, is simply change and it's not the end. Knowing and fostering that what you once feared was a curse may in fact really be a brilliance if you take the time to uncover them. That is acceptance. Knowing that improvement is often measured by gains and not necessarily the elimination of a behavior, that's acceptance. Knowing that others' ignorance is simply that, theirs, not yours, not your child's, it's their ignorance. That is acceptance. Knowing that you have become comfortable in your new life, your new challenges, your new role, your new reality, that is acceptance. So, basically with acceptance will come the peace that really all special needs parents need to continue on this really incredible journey. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the importance of appreciating the wonder and marvel of different. And I am a huge proponent for separating the child from the disorder. And oftentimes it's hard for us to look at the child as the incredible kid that they are, and we tend to focus on the disorders, the deficits, and the behaviors that affect them. So to be able to separate the child from the disorder is really important, and it's part of the acceptance process. It takes time. It takes sometimes years to unravel the issues surrounding the diagnosis. So many kids are getting diagnoses so early, and it really is impossible to know if that's correct. It takes time. It takes time to educate yourself, and it takes time to adjust. So during that time, just like the parents, before they really have true acceptance, the child may not be able to separate themselves from the disorder. They're frustrated by their inability to change, to overcome their challenges, and just be, quote unquote, a normal kid. They're confused, they're fearful, they're overwhelmed by the world around them. And these children are really struggling at home, at school, on the playground. And until these, skills, coping skills are acquired and the gains are made, they feel they are their disorder. And it does not feel good. So if we are giving a message to not accept the disorder and the life changes it brings, we may be sending, not intentionally, a message that they are not accepted. So care really needs to be taken to ensure that, words are chosen carefully and that the child is not interchangeable with the disorder. I know I made this mistake, and this is something why I share this with parents, is that by going from doctor to doctor and therapist to therapist, my daughter had PANDAS, pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder, where she got OCD and Tourette's tics from a strep infection. And trying to get help for her, she portrayed as me trying to fix her. And, that sent her a message that she was broken. And that was not the message that I wanted to give her. So, our brains are very unique, and our behavior styles dictate learning, processing, social behavior. And what I want you to think about when you're thinking about the wonder and marvel of different is the different thinking styles that people probably don't even think about until you have a child like this. So, let's take auditory and visual thinkers. They can seem like they're from two different worlds. A visual thinker, a visual learner living and learning in an auditory environment can be very misunderstood or even worse, misdiagnosed, and it goes the other way. Did you know that over 80% of a child's school day is auditory? So how would that affect a visual learner, a visual thinker? Our system of conformity in raising and teaching our kids has not accounted for the uniqueness of the brain and its response to the environment. So does expecting conformity for these children and the familiar, is it replacing what was, quote unquote, considered normal? So parents with a struggling child or teen in a school setting, especially those whose talents are evident to them and others, we have to stand up to conformity to get our children the differentiated education that will reveal the child's gifts and unique abilities and not just their deficits. That's where we're losing the kids. So we have to stop looking at the differences as a negative and look at them as the positives they can be. And, sometimes what makes these kids different makes them difficult, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But it's really time for parents and educators and everyone else to stop labeling these kids and start appreciating the uniqueness. I've had the honor of interviewing Dr. Alan Francis, I think 4 times. He was the chair of the DSM-4. He's also on my advisory board of the new institute. And I've interviewed him together with Dr. Dale Archer, and they are really bringing to the forefront in their books saving normal. And, the fear that, childhood is becoming labeled as a mental illness. It's the enormous importance, I think, of standardized testing that's feeding into this frenzy that we're seeing in redefining normal. It's the necessity of having a diagnosis to get accommodations that's feeding into the frenzy of getting a diagnosis. I have a list of a few things I just wanted to throw out to you. Is the child that prefers quiet time, the child that enjoys one-on-one play instead of large groups, the teen that prefers going out with friends instead of going to parties, the teen that doesn't feel they have to be out every night on the weekend, are they now to be diagnosed with depression? Is the child who is the life of the party, who's a bit of a class clown, outgoing, energetic, now getting a diagnosis of ADHD? The teen rebelling or acting out and, that's being diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder or ADHD or bipolar, could they in fact be lacking coping skills, because not all kids acquire coping skills naturally? Some need to be taught. Are we coming to a point that every negative emotion, every struggling kid is being considered a child with a mental illness? We need to really take care to make sure that we are not overdiagnosing kids and that we are appreciating differences and not labeling them. As I always tell parents with a struggling child or teen in a school setting, especially these kids that I talked about before that have these great gifts, we need to look at the numbers because they're staggering. 1 in 10 children are diagnosed with ADHD. 1 in 68 are diagnosed with autism, 2/3 of those being mostly high functioning with Asperger's syndrome. These are the kids that are so often fall through the cracks, the children who, because of being misunderstood or misidentified, are given educations far below their capabilities, and we're seeing this all the time. These kids that either score very well and are told they don't need services, or the kids that are struggling but they don't have a place for, the children who are steered away from their true potential due to their differences, which are allowed to overshadow their strengths. So these are the children who spend their lives trying to unravel the social cues and overexcitabilities that often leave them isolated. Overexcitabilities is, as you know, I'm sure on the show, a huge problem for these kids because it's so misunderstood, and these kids really can't get a handle on it. These are the children that are often referred to as gifted or twice exceptional. Both terms are used interchangeably, and they're both often misused and misunderstood. A child that is referred to as gifted, or 2E, twice exceptional, has both unique gifts in specific areas as well as deficits, which can lead to diagnoses of mostly ADHD and autism, but it could also be social anxiety disorders, OCD. There are many different disorders that can make a child's gifts and abilities not be shown. And parents wind up navigating the muddy waters of misdiagnosis and mislabeling of these bright children without any direction, which is why we're bringing you the Bright Not Broken Institute. But I think parents are a diagnostician's greatest asset. We are the medical historians. We are the holders of the keys for the potential for our kids. And, we cannot be limited to a diagnostic criteria that doesn't show our children's abilities, to an educational system. These kids are trapped in two systems, the mental health system and the educational system. So parents really have to find their own way, and that is where the problem is coming in. It's time for us to take the leap. We are our children's greatest assets. We need to be ready to implement the true meaning of advocacy and pave the way for these bright minds, because we're losing a lot of our bright minds. Our children are bright, not broken. Our kids are special not only in their needs, but in their brilliance as well. And unless we do the work and take the time and stop looking for a quick fix, we're going to lose these kids' potentials. The next slide, which I think you're going to love, because this really has helped a lot of parents, is looking with a new set of eyes and understanding and surviving your defiant child or teen. And, it really begins with the mindset, because if you look at your child as trying to control you or your home or your life, you're losing the battle. If you can look at your child as trying to gain control of his or her own life, is struggling to interpret their world, is feeling overwhelmed due to a lack of reasoning skills or communication skills or sensory overload, and by the way, I've done over 400 interviews, and no matter what the disorder, I can't think of one that did not have sensory overload and self-regulation problems as part and parcel. So looking at the behaviors with a different set of eyes sometimes leads to the out-of-the-box thinking and problem solving, because behind every behavior is a cause and usually a trigger. So we can't assume that the child does not want to be cooperative. We have to try instead to assume that they don't have the tools to think on that level or to collaborate or compromise in problem solving. So if you see your child as an underachiever, you see your child as being lazy, immature, stubborn, unmotivated, if you see your child as a burden to your family, you need to remember that saying that the eyes are the window to the soul, and they mirror our feelings and emotions. So chances are, if it's in your eyes, it's in their view. So negativity breeds negativity. So if what you're doing isn't working, try to turn it around. Try to be a detective. No child wants to fail. No child wants to not be accepted. And I know that dealing with a raging, defiant, nasty, aggressive child is horrible. It is absolutely exhausting, and one of the hardest things a parent with a child with mental illness is going to have to do. It's frightening because it can be so random, yet it can be so predictable, and it takes every ounce of strength to restrain yourself from saying things or losing your patience. But as absolutely draining and painful as it is to us, imagine being that kid. Imagine being that out of control. So sometimes I think we need to take a look at our expectations. We need to see if we're setting the bar too high. We have to see what the impairments are with the child. Perhaps expectations during times of exacerbations need to be dropped or lessened. Often these kids are out of control and in a chronic state of chaos. They need to learn to calm. They need to regulate. That was something that I wanted to go into in a little while, but we need to go in and we need to look to see, is this a medication problem? Oftentimes when you give a child a medication and that affects one neurotransmitter, it affects another. Could it be a learning disability, a sensory issue? Is it organic? The biggest thing I talk about on the show is trying to find, if there is one, an organic basis for the behaviors. It infuriates me that as soon as a child has any type of a behavioral problem, they're sent to a psychologist, they're sent to a psychiatrist, when they should be sent to an endocrinologist, because girls with polycystic ovarian syndrome almost always have anxiety disorders and depression, and when you resolve the polycystic ovarian syndrome, the behaviors improve. Sleep apnea has almost all the same characteristics as ADHD, again, when it's treated. So there are a lot of things that parents need to look into. But most importantly is that, punishing these kids doesn't work. Pushing these kids down further into the abyss doesn't work. Negatives don't work. We need to raise these kids back up. We need to find what they're good at. We have to help them focus on that. We have to give them a sense of pride and accomplishment so that they can have confidence in social arenas as well. And the way to do this is really to talk less and listen more. Because when you listen and you don't assume why they're angry or why they're upset, you may just hear where all of this is coming from. So I think ultimately it's very important. The most important thing probably is to teach kids to be collaborative problem solvers. They need to be part of the solution and not just the problem. The next thing I was going to talk about is learning the language of positives. And this one a lot of parents have a hard time with because it's foreign. I know for myself, and I'll assume for pretty much everyone here who might be listening, that we always thought what we want for our kids is just to be happy. But what we weren't told was that first we need to teach calm, because then the happy will follow. So this is really, it's a frustrating world. And so when you combine this with having a disorder or a situational circumstance, these kids need to learn how to calm and to reason. And when I say they need to learn, in order to learn these skills, they need to find their calm. It's great for us to take them for yoga. It's fabulous deep breathing. All of these things are wonderful. Exposing them to these things for calming techniques are wonderful. But at the end of the day, they have to find their own calm. And to do this, teaching them calm, they have to get to that place where they can identify it in themselves. And it doesn't matter what it is. They need to find it on their own, and they need to understand that feeling of self-calm. I have an analogy I'll go through very quickly because I know I'm running out of time here, but I have an analogy that I use with an egg. So what I say is if you want to try to think of the eggshells that we use when we make an omelet, we don't just go to the kitchen and have an omelet. There's a lot of things we do before. We have to, cut up the cheeses, we have to chop the vegetables, we have to saute the meats, and a lot happens before we crack those eggs. So we put a lot of effort into everyday simple recipes. And the reason they come out so good is because we're consistent and we get it right and we know that it works. So the reason is because things become effortless. And now if you focus on the eggshells that are left there, they're delicate, they're fragile, they're hard to handle, they're just like our kids. So the amount of effort and being proactive and organized that we are in making that omelet, we need to take the same time and be proactive and plan and put thought into how we deal with these children. The next thing I was going to discuss was anxiety at the core of your child's negative behaviors and how it affects the limbic system, meltdowns, and defiance. In over 400 interviews, like I said, that I've done, sensory issues always seem to be part and parcel, but so is anxiety. And anxiety and depression are very real in children and can lead to just complete disruption in their lives. I did a 3-part interview with Dr. Deborah Serrani that was just incredible, that if anybody has a child with depression, you should try to listen to. But anxiety in children and teens is under-recognized, unaddressed, and it's always chalked up to drama. And we really cannot should not underestimate anxiety in children. The biggest challenge that I see is that children often behave very badly due to anxiety, and parents don't recognize it as anxiety. For those that listen to my show, I'm sure that you're very tired of hearing me talk about the amygdala. But any parent who has a child who's dysregulated, who's anxious, needs to learn about the limbic system and the amygdala and how, it can... what it is meant to save us and keep us safe from danger can become a loop and backfire on these children. So, to us having a truck coming straight at us on the street, a child can have the same reaction to, not having white bread in the house if they want toast. So it's very important to understand the limbic system and the fact that for us, without an anxiety disorder, this type of dysregulation can last for a short time, but in a child with an anxiety disorder, it can last a very long time. And I remember for my daughter, what we used to do was we used to give her measurements in Rugrats. I don't even know if that's still on the air. But, we would tell her that it'll take, probably 3 Rugrats before, her heart and her body will calm down, and it gave her a gauge to how long she was going to be feeling like this. But, these behaviors, these anxiety behaviors that are really cortisol and adrenaline are related to autism, bipolar, OCD, a lot of disorders, and there are a lot of safer medications that can be used that target the adrenaline system than those that are being used now. Okay, I think I covered the next topic, which was the best thing to give your child is the gift of self-calming techniques, and I'll just go through that quickly. For yourself, did somebody teach you how to calm? Nobody taught me how to calm. I think it was something I had to find for myself, and I think everybody has to find it for themselves. And that is probably the best gift that you can give your child, is to help them find their own calm, whether it's going for a walk or a jog or sports. Music is just fantastic. Fidgets are great, fidgets to focus. And video games. A lot of parents don't like video games, but if that's what it takes to have your kid calm, then that's a great thing. I was going to go into, I didn't realize how long this was running, I was going to go into standing up to conformity for gifted children. But Susan, do I have time for that, or would you like me to take some questions?
We should probably take some questions, if you don't mind. Maybe we can come back to that.
Okay.
But this was extremely interesting. Some of the questions, maybe we could just go back to the beginning and sort of, Marianne, and sort of talk a little bit more about how you come to that acceptance that brings you that positive attitude. It sounds great, but, so many people are saying, this is terrific, but I don't know how to get there. I don't know how to
It
get past the
it takes a while to
opposition.
get there.
Yeah.
It takes a long time, years, which is the time I'm trying to save for parents. Because I think that for, initially, especially if you have several children and you have a child who hasn't had behavioral problems, you just don't get it. Why don't you listen? Why just can't you do it this way? And, you hear from doctors and therapists, all well-intended, that, you have to do the timeouts and you have to do all these things. And I think parents, if you're listening and you have a child like this, it doesn't work. So, it's almost like that, monkey that keeps going back to get zapped. I mean, how many times can you get zapped before you realize it's not working? So, I think the biggest part of the acceptance, honestly, is when you get to that place in yourself where you don't worry about what other people are thinking and you don't let your parenting be affected by what other people are thinking. Because in the short run, you may feel better, but in the long run, you need to manage your home, you need to manage your family, and you need to do what's best for your family. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems, is that people let outside influences affect their ability to accept.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Someone just posted, I have 2 ADHD children, and it wasn't until I watched Russell Barkley speak on Essential Ideas for Parents video that I came to understand more about how to accept and advocate. It's really hard. There's no question.
Mm-hmm.
Very hard. And I guess one of the posts, and I know that in talking before, you mentioned that this is not uncommon. People are saying, I understand, but how do I get my relatives, my spouse, the people around my child to understand that they're not just willfully behaving badly?
Well, there are some people you're just not going to be able to. But as far as people that have to be able to, teachers, that's where you may have to, you have to know your rights. You have to know that, when you go into these meetings, if you feel that the teacher is not educated on the disorder, you have a right to have training for that teacher, even if it's with, your child's doctor or yourself or whatever. The parent, it's not an option for the teacher not to be educated on the disorders. Now, whether or not they're going to implement things, that's a different story, and that's where different accommodations come in. That's why we have an IEP. As far as family members and friends, there are those that are going to get it. There are those that no matter what, it's like politics. You're not. There's some people you're just not going to change their minds, and sometimes, unfortunately, you have to find out who you're going to cut loose, and different ways that you're going to socialize. I mean, sometimes, I say to parents, sometimes you take 2 cars because the other children shouldn't have to miss out on family gatherings and things like that. So you need to make sure that you don't set your child up for failure in social situations too. So, if you take 2 cars and, you stay for a little while, and when the child says, I've had enough, you take that child home, even separate vacations. It's difficult when people don't get it, but you have to prioritize your life, and your child is your priority. So if somebody's not getting your child or somebody's affecting the way you parent your child, sometimes you just have to cut them loose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, hard to do when it's your spouse. That's
well, the spouse is the biggest problem. When
right.
you have, the spouse is a very different situation, and I hear it all the time. And a lot of people like to say, "Oh, it's the dads." It's not always the dads. Oftentimes, moms have a hard time getting it, and that's one of the things that we're going to be doing at the Institute, because we see this as a huge problem, is the awareness training, and they have to want to hear it. They have to want to change, and that's where outside influence comes in. Because oftentimes, what I find is that the parent or the spouse who is just digging in their heels really feels they need to, abide by expectations other people might have on them. So it's difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura says, I've accepted and I can cope with my son's diagnosis, but my husband is still in denial. And I guess practically, a lot of that comes down to how you respond to behavior that would be unacceptable.
Right.
And that's a question that's being posed here by a number of people. How do I understand the source of my child's misbehavior and yet not condone it through my behavior? What are some practical ways to cope with, especially oppositional behavior?
Right. It's very hard, and to just go back to the first part, I think there's no bigger struggle for spouses than those with gifted children. The ones that have children that are very bright, I mean, those with severe autism or, severe disorders, bipolar, things like that. I think that it's oftentimes parents can obviously see there is a serious illness here. It's the ones that are in the gray zone. That's really the problem. And that's why learning about, giftedness and learning about finding kids' strengths is really important, because that's a big problem. The parent might say, what are you talking about? He gets all A's. Why can't he behave? As far as, allowing bad behavior, all I can say to that is that I tried to, at one point, have the mindset that letting her have her disorder and trying to respect her and speak in the language of positives, which I didn't get to, but is really, really important. That there's everything that can be said negatively can be said positively. And, that's key. Now, is that, being a bad parent by, am I allowing bad behavior by trying to make her more comfortable and trying to not have her rage or have a meltdown? I don't think so.
Can you give an example?
I think that's good parenting.
Marianne, can you give an example of a positive response in a raging situation?
Well, listen, when a kid is raging, there is absolutely, that is not the time to try to be rational at all. So, that's the time to be calm. And, I think that today's technology is huge for situations like that. If you have a kid that's out of control and raging, you need to have a safe place in your home. So you need to have a place where the child can go and calm themselves down. Like I said, you need to teach the self-calming in times of calm, but using texting is huge, because you'll find that most of the the worst rages are when you're face-to-face. So using texting is huge. Instead of, just always use positives. Like instead of saying, if you don't clean up your room, you're not going to the movies Saturday. You could say, well, I know you really want to go to the movies Saturday. Do you want me to help you clean up your room? So you're giving them a choice. You're not threatening. So everything has to is the language of positives. And it's really difficult to do, because parents feel, I'm the parent, I'm the boss, you have to listen. Well, good luck, because you're going to have a lot of broken walls and a lot of fighting going on.
Is there people are really intrigued by this concept of the language of positive?
Okay,
where can people learn about that, or what else would you advise?
I actually have it on my website, on my private. I have The Life Unexpected, which is a book that I'm writing. But I'll give you some examples. The biggest thing is the outsiders, because that's really what I find is creating a lot of problems. But like I said, is being respectful and choosing our words carefully spoiling a child? I really don't think it is. I think it's a big mistake parents make, because what they're not understanding is that, if you're speaking with a person who's raging, your child, and you're speaking calmly and you're speaking with respect, they are going to eventually mirror that as they get older. So, this isn't just getting you through your childhood. These kids have their whole life ahead of them, but it's making them part of the solution instead of the problem. Like you can say, it's cold outside today, so you have to wear a sweater to school. Here it comes, yelling, screaming. Instead, you could say, God, it's really chilly outside. Which sweater would you like to wear? Go pick whatever one you want. Giving them choices and letting them feel that they're in control. Sometimes giving the kids control puts the parent in the driver's seat. It's really that simple.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's helpful. So in terms of discipline, I guess the whole concept of discipline for kids who are, there are a number of people say, well, how do we discipline a child who's oppositional or rude or behavior is unacceptable?
Well, I think the problem is if you look at discipline as what can I take away, how can I teach them a lesson by using negative, that for some children it's just not going to work. Listen, I've got 4 kids, so consequences worked well for many. Consequences did not work well for the one. So now, would I continue with discipline and consequences that didn't work, that just caused chaos in the house? Or would I try to just use those as teaching moments and try to calm her, and when she's calm, discuss it? I mean, that's the problem. And, as far as the discipline goes, it depends on the child. If you have a child that barely goes out, that doesn't have friends, really, what are you going to take away? So, it really depends on the situation, but you have to find out ultimately what is your goal of the discipline.
What are you trying to accomplish? Are you a believer in behavior charts and rewarding
for very
kids
young
for good
children? I think it could be helpful. Yeah, I think for very young children, every kid is so different. That's what it is. Is that the parent really has to put in the time to see what works for their child, because what works for one isn't going to work for the other.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's probably true. A number of people, just turning to self-calming for a minute, which I think is a really interesting idea. And I want to talk more about that. But one specific question is, and a couple of people have said their child definitely uses video games as a calming device, but how do they manage that? Isn't there a damage, potential damage to many, many hours of video games? Especially the role of video games in today's world is just an endless problem for parents.
I agree. When I mentioned the video games, what I'm talking about is when a child is in a complete panic attack. If you have a child with an anxiety disorder, and you've seen what they go through, whatever it takes for them to calm during that time where their limbic system needs to calm down. They do. Now, do I think a kid should be playing video games all day long? Absolutely not. I'm talking about in times of real dysregulation when the kid is having a meltdown. Maybe it's because they're frustrated with their homework. I mean, one of the problems is that it's very hard to find the triggers. You have to figure out the situation. Is it always at home? Is it always at school? There's a lot of things that could be causing it. Could they have tactile sensitivities? Mm-hmm. Could they have lighting? A lot of kids can't handle the lighting in school. There are a lot of reasons. But coming home, these kids are done. It is so hard for these kids with Tourette's, OCD, bipolar, ADHD. Can you imagine how hard it is to hold it together for 6 hours in school, come home, and have to do homework? They're done. They're exhausted. They need to come home and be allowed to have their disorder and allowed to calm or do whatever it is that they need to do. Now, that's not saying play video games all night long, but you've got to respect the fact that this is part of the acceptance. You can't ignore the fact they have the disorder. It can't just go away when it best suits you. They have the disorder.
I think you're really onto something by pointing out the sensory component. No question, but that underlies so many other varied problems. And, I know from my own daughter who just can't tolerate loud noise or a certain light or, it's a huge cause of behavior that looks like it's oppositional, but really is just avoiding. I think that, I don't know why it isn't talked about more. It really isn't sensory
We
disorder.
talk about it endlessly on my show because it is huge. And, part of the problem is that, parents aren't constructing a life, an environment, an education that suits the child's differences. They're trying to get the child to conform to the norm. And let's face it, these school districts have hundreds of thousands of kids. They can't have these individual, educations. But you need to find it. That's your job as a parent. The school may be helpful, but you, as the parent, you need to find it. You need to figure out what your child's learning style is, what their thinking style is. What are they good at? Are they good at music? Are they good at art? Are they good at, pattern thinkers, math? You need to find it. And you need to find, if your child isn't fitting in at school, if your child is bright but not learning at school, you need to take advantage of other types of venues that they may have. I mean, here on Long Island, we have BOCES, where they have vocational training, which they have like the High School for the Arts, where they have amazing film programs, everything. it's going to change the child's life, because I was very lucky that when my daughter first had the pandas, I didn't understand it. I've never dealt with anything like this. It was 20 years ago. I had nowhere to go. So I was allowed to go and sit at a meeting, a group of teenagers, middle schoolers and teenagers, that would meet every week, that had OCD, bipolar, Tourette's, all these types of things. And these kids spoke to me, and it changed. Maybe this is what made me change my acceptance more than anything else. Because I remember the one boy told me about his Tourette's, that it's an itch you can't scratch. Mm-hmm. It is a restlessness that causes physical pain, that it is a suppression that takes every ounce of strength all day long to suppress. And in that case, there should be a place for this child to go and release tics, which I won't even go into right now. Whereas I met a girl with OCD who had to count every B in the sentence as she read it. You try to read and do that. So think about the energy that these kids spend all day long just trying to learn and be in school for 6 hours. And you think about it. I say it's like, think about having sandpaper in your stilettos or having an elastic band around your tie. Would you be able to function and focus at school? Would you be drained and done by the end of the day? You have to have compassion for these kids. And as much as we wish they didn't have their differences, they do.
Yeah. And one person has posted here, let me find this. She said, we have a fabulous ADHD child. This is wonderful. And when he comes home and he has an hour free, and then he gets down to his homework. So they have a timer go off, and it works well for them. So based on what you're saying, I guess it's determining your child's ability to make the transition from coming home to homework, what works for that child to relax, when he's ready to start up again. And
I had one child that would come home, and she would, boom, get her homework done, and she was finished for the rest of the day. I had another child that needed to come home, needed to unwind, needed to listen to music. I mean, they're different. But, I think the way that you're going to be able to figure out what's best for your child is to just always try to look at it from their lens. Try to look at it through the filter that they have all day long in school. Because I think that when you try to parent with compassion, you become a much better parent, than when you try to parent with an iron fist.
Right. Here's a challenge that, I can really understand this. When you have more than one child in the household, how do you manage one set of rules for the child with special needs and another set of rules for the other children?
I can tell you what I did. I don't know if parents
What worked for you?
Well, whenever I would hear, well, why does, she get to do this and why does she get to do that? And, it just came one day. I just said, would you rather switch places?
Wow. Yeah.
And that was it. Would you rather have the OCD and have the tics and have the struggles and not be able to walk out the front door? Would you rather switch places? Mm-hmm. And that's what the biggest problem is. Parents need to be able to parent their children with differences differently, without outside influence and without inside influence. Because in the end, if you don't, and if you try to apply the same rules to children who are so neurobiologically different, the house is going to be in chaos.
Right.
But, that said, you need to make special time for the child that doesn't have any differences. I mean, that's huge. We always did that.
Right. As Jackie says, the answer to that is each child gets what they need. Fair doesn't mean equal. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can we turn and to talk for a minute about 2E children? It's a wonderful question here. My son is in high school now, has ADD, anxiety, and a very high IQ, but has a really difficult time keeping up. In a schedule of honor classes, how do we decide what's best for him? Continuing in honors, which is his ability, or because of the stress and the anxiety, moving him into regular classes, which are below his level of ability, but are, academic, maybe he'll be more at peace.
Yeah, that's a
And
really
these
tough
decisions
one.
are so tough. Yeah, I know. We face that in our household for sure.
Well,
It's a
one of
tough
the
one.
things that I would suggest was that, again, once you find the abilities, but, you need to work with your school district because your child has rights and there are a lot of options. So, let's just say they're overwhelmed by the day or whatever the case may be. I mean, you could consider doing things. If you have a very bright child, you can consider maybe doing half days where they take their core honors classes in the morning. And then maybe they have some type of a program like we have here, BOCES, and most people do, where they could, get on a bus and they go to a different location and they take something that they're really interested in. And this isn't just academically important. This is socially important because when your kid is with kids that are like-minded, kids that have the same interests, and when your kid is really good at something, kids are going to gravitate towards them. They're not going to be the loser. They're not going to be the weird kid. They're going to be the cool kid. Like, wow, did you see how that kid, built that robot or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's very hard because I know here we have the International Baccalaureate program, and it is grueling. So you have to just know what your child's level is. The problem is, a lot of these kids sometimes I think need home tutoring for periods of time when they're severely impaired, where the district sends teachers to the school. Some of these programs, like the International Baccalaureate program, doesn't allow home tutoring, but most honors programs do. So that's another option, that if the child is really dysregulated, that is your right to home tutoring. And that's not homeschooling where the parent teaches the child. This is where they send tutors or teachers to the school during times of severe dysregulation.
Okay. Then we turn back to self-calming. People are really intrigued by that idea and wanting some help for how to help their child learn how to self-calm.
Well, when they're very young, you would guide them.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did with the Rugrats and the breathing. And, for her, it didn't work, the breathing. But, you have to sort of see what helps them. You talk to them. You let them be part of the process because this is lifelong. So, like what makes you feel calmer? What makes you feel better? For some kids, it's going and running around the block. For some kids, it's listening to music. You can see what calms your child.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what you have to do is you have to then try to incorporate whatever that may be into their life. How can they use something similar like that? And it's what I found was that it really isn't the action of
Mm-hmm.
calming. What I found, what I think it was that once they got that feeling of what it feels like to be able to calm themselves down, it sort of quells the anxiety a little bit, and it gives them a little bit more confidence. So it's something that you just have to sit with your child and try to figure out, or observe with your child. But you have to allow them to do that. When your kid is screaming and cursing and throwing things, the last thing you want to do is say, I love you, I see you're struggling, and what can I do to help you? But that's what you need to say. You do not need to deal anything that's going on in that conversation. That is the time that you have to let them know, I get it. I see you're in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when hopefully in times of calm, when you've tried to help them use their calming techniques, they'll be able to use it. And texting is great because they can go in their room and you want to check on them because you're worried, and they just have to text a few things, and it's amazing how much calmer it is when it's not face to face.
That is so true. I cannot tell you how true that is. We've finally discovered that with a child who's 23. The texting is the way to work. Yeah, it really makes a huge difference. Nikki, this is so interesting, Nikki. Thank you for posting this. In my classroom, I did stations for a week with different calming practices and had the kids rate them for themselves. That's brilliant.
It. Oh, that's
Wonderful.
Brilliant. Oh, whoever you are, please, if you're on Twitter, go to the Coffee Clatch and just say it's me or whatever, because I want to talk to you. Oh, that is huge.
Isn't that amazing? That is so brilliant. And I wonder what grade level, Nikki, what grade level do you teach post that? But another point that's being raised here is that a lot of kids with special needs have calming behaviors that that really isolate them. So whether that's reading, one parent here says her child's calming thing is to read, but to avoid everything else. Or video games, and so many kids have
So are we talking
social
about in
isolation.
school? Is that what
No,
we're talking
out of
about?
school.
Oh, okay.
So avoiding other kids, avoiding extracurricular activities, avoiding,
Right.
just really isolating themselves and
Oh, I
having
know.
social
Yeah, I
issues.
get this. And I can tell you something that I was told um, a long time ago by a great psychologist. And I was so worried about, being isolated because, like I said, at the end of the day, she was done. The last thing she wanted to do was a play date or team sports. Forget team sports. But, karate, other things can be very helpful. But one thing that he said to me was that, what are you worried about? And I said, I'm just worried that, how is she going to be able to, make friends? How is she, when she gets older, how is she going to be able to, have relationships, talk to people? And he said, well, who does she seem to relate to best? And I says, well, much younger kids or much older kids. And she says, and you have great relationships, you have friends? And I'm like, yes. And he says, they will eventually mirror it. So make sure that what they're looking at in you is something, like they say, live the life you want your child to have. So, having one friend is more important than having 15 friends that are going to ruin your child's self-confidence. It's that simple. And as far as the self-calming and, calming techniques, kids will learn how to do that on their own, but, these long play dates are never a good idea for these kids. These sleepovers, just too much for these kids. But these kids, more importantly, need to have these techniques in school because, let's face it, they're with their peers 6 hours a day. The other kids, when they get to, once they're in middle school, kids are pretty observant. And this is something that can be put in an IEP, that your child has to be able to have a place to go for calming. Now, some kids have this for tics. Some kids have this for OCD. You can't just pretend they don't have their disorder and that, from 9 to 6, they're not allowed to have their disorder. So it can be written in the IEP that there can be a place. It could be the nurse's office. It could be someplace in the library. It could be someplace where there's always a person, or there can be a contact if the child doesn't have an aide, where they can go and just regulate. Whether it's rock, sometimes they can have a rocking chair. That's very helpful for a lot of kids, where they can sit in a rocking chair.
That's a great idea because two people here, Mickey and Christy, both posted that their child, one 10 years old and one 13, sucks their thumb in order to be calm. And that's really a difficult behavior to do at school, right? So if they had a place to go, then that, if that's what works, then that makes so much sense.
Or they can try I actually have a show. I just posted it on Twitter today. Oh, I didn't. I'll post it for you. I'm going to put it on the Coffee Clutch Twitter feed, Mouthing Matters. It was on a show by Ariva Weiss, who is the creator of Fun and Function. They make all types of sensory equipment and things. But, what was that called? Jewelry. Other things for mouth could help. Jewelry. Lorna and Pierrette, who were hosts on my show. You try to find more appropriate types of self-soothing things
introduce
to
something
school
that has the same effect but isn't so unacceptable.
Because what I think you will find, and I know for a fact parents will find and educators will find, is that if a child knows they have an out, they're not going to really need it so much. It's when they feel that they're trapped in that uncomfortable feeling and that they're stuck in this room that gets them completely overwhelmed. Where if they know that they have a contact person, that they have someplace to go, whether it's to go outside with an aide and swing on a swing for 10 minutes, whatever it may be, you're going to find they really don't need it because a lot of the anxiety is anticipating the fact that they have a long time to wait for relief.
Right. That's really interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking back to my own daughter in middle school. She read a lot as an avoidance technique, which one of the parents here posted about, Jackie. And she also made friends with a special ed teacher, so she would go there and hang out. And in retrospect, I see that was a sort of a calming place to go. And that's an interesting, I didn't understand that at the time, but yeah.
I mean, some kids can have in their IEP that they can bring an iPad, or not an iPad, an iPad for, to do a video game or something, or an iPhone to listen to music, and it's kept in like the nurse's office or it's kept in the whose ever office. And if that's what they use for self-calming, that can be written in an IEP.
Right. Marianne, you said that you are very available and you respond on your Twitter feed. Do you want to talk a little bit about how people on the webinar can reach you, can get help from you, can
Sure.
take advantage of your resources and insights before we close?
We're really, our hub is Twitter, and we're the Coffee Clatch, KLATCH, on Twitter. And just put at the Coffee Clatch, and if you have any questions or if there's anything we can do, we've had, I think, like 12 shows now, and our hosts are all very accessible, and if I don't have an answer for you, I will shoot it over to one of our hosts or one of the hundreds, thousands at this point of guests that we've had on. Also you can email me at Marianne, Marianne, at thecoffeeclatch.com, and I try to answer as many emails as possible, or I will ask your permission and forward it to one of our experts. We have a lot of resources and a lot of blogs on the website. That's www.thecoffeeclatch.com, and all of our interviews from both networks. I have two networks. One is the special needs talk radio, and the other is the Coffee Clatch. And everything is free on iTunes, and everything is on Blog Talk. And we really have a lot of information for parents.
That's great. That's really great.
And the Institute, like I said, I'm hoping that you're going to have us on for a webinar because it is huge. Every child has a gift. They may not be a genius. Every child has a gift, and everybody has a unique ability. If you find that unique ability, you can change a child's life.
Absolutely. Jackie Whipple says, this information is so helpful. Thank you. I want to join her in thanking you, Marianne, for all that you do and for this positive approach toward our kids, which is sometimes hard to do. Karen says, this was amazing. I had a really bad day. And I woke up with no hope, and I feel so much better. And
can I just say one thing really quick?
Please. Yeah.
Very, very quick. One thing I want to just talk to parents about is the inevitable setbacks. There will be setbacks. They are going to devastate you. You are going to think that everything you did was for naught. All I can tell you is don't panic. I mean, unless they're suicidal or self-harm or something. But really, it's the setbacks set the parents back more than the kids. So that's just one thing I wanted to say, that you're going to have really bad days, but you're going to get through it.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for all your hope and optimism. People are saying they feel empowered, they feel much less alone, and their spirits are lifted. So thank you again for everything.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Take care.
For more Attitude Podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.